today I'm going to be talking about Ableton. I'm super excited about this video. If you didn't check out the last one, I'll leave a link here, but I saw a lot of good feedback coming from the first one, so I just thought, you know what, I'll continue this process, keep making some of these tutorials on how to do stuff, because it really helped me if I was in this situation starting out and I have no clue. So this is designed for beginners, just like this whole category would be designed for new people who are just absolutely clueless, don't even know where to start, don't even know what buttons to press. So if that's you, feel free to stick around and check out some of the stuff I have. I also want to say, with this video, I'll say it several times, but there are other people who are way more advanced when it comes to how to use Ableton, because it's so versatile. So make sure you check out those people's videos too, more advanced and more intermediate and different types of stuff. So let's get into it. Okay, starting off, we are going to have to think about this software differently, this application differently. Now, originally, I thought it would be simple. You drag and drop, you have some sounds, you put them in, whatever. But if you're like me, you're stuck on this screen. This is what you see right here, is this fucking screen. And you have no clue how to get out of it. Well, I'll tell you how. So basically what's happening here is there is different ways that you can think about Ableton, but the way I would like you to think about it is kind of like, it's kind of like paper, right? It's like paper. You're just working with like paper in a way. So this is all like what you see here. This is all part of the application. Okay, and I need to explain this for people who wouldn't understand, because I didn't understand this, and it makes it a lot better having some perspective. So this is all just like the application. There's several different areas, different boxes that do different things. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at these boxes. That we're going to start with the layout, because I think that's the most confusing part. So what we have over here is kind of like where all your samples and all your sounds and instruments and all your things will be on this left here. And if you want to search them, like let's say I want to listen to a clap, I can type in clap there, and then through these folders it'll cycle through all the words that have the word clap in it. Now as you can see, I can go to the samples that are already in a mesh. I can go to all results, which will show everything that I have on here. Let me go here, change this actually. Okay, let's see here, did we get that? Much better. All right, now, so this section on the left, as you can tell, you can filter, you can do different things. This is where you would search through your category of different types of instruments, sounds, samples you create yourself. This is where you can add your own folder of your own stuff, but we'll get into that a little later, because that's in a different spot. That's like the first section. The second section here, this bottom stuff. So you see this bottom stuff, we'll get more advanced on this later, but this bottom stuff, don't worry about this right now, because this is what we would call an effect rack, and that's something that you would add to change the sounds and enhance them, edit them, make them better, things like that. Right? So that's this little second bar on the bottom. Now all this main stuff in the middle, you can't really see it here, but I'll move my stuff so you can see it. But there is a button that you can get out of this mode. So all this is how sound works is it goes from one place and then to another, right? So basically what's happening is there are sounds coming through, and this is the back end. This is where things are coming out. So the reason why this looks so strange, and some people can make music in this mode, but I don't preferably, this is keeping all the tracks, every sound that you'll add will have a specific designated area, like a certain slot, right? So these are all the slots, and they all come out of this sector, and then they all come out on the right over to the master. This is the main master, right? So you kind of need to understand this stuff so you can understand how it'll all group together. Now, if you want to get out of this mode, I never knew this for the longest time, so I kind of just gave my hands up. If you press tab, you'll immediately go to what I like to call the time lapse. Like, this is just like over time. Now, what really would help to kind of understand what we're looking at is we're looking at seconds. We're looking at this bar here, this time. Time is going from left to right. So we have the start point on the left, this very beginning part. Then we have the ending, which would be wherever the song would end. God. Clicked one button. Okay. So then we have the start and the end, right? So things start here at the 0 seconds, and then we'll go on. So if I let this play, if I just turn on this is where the metronome is. It's on the top left with the 2 buttons, right? And if you want to turn that and just listen, you see that from the point of 0 seconds to the point of 10 seconds, that's what it's measuring. This is all the time lapse. It's going from left to right. It's going from 0 seconds on. Now, what we also have here are these tracks that I mentioned. There's several different tracks, right? So I've labeled mine already, and I'll show you how to do that. But I've labeled mine here. I have this one kick. I have this one snare. I have this one clap. I have a serum here, and I have a group for sidechain. But we'll get into that. So basically, like I said, all that's happening is these tracks are going to the back end out, and then they're going to a master, and the master is the final product that comes to the ears. So when I mentioned to think about this like paper, it's like things can move around, but essentially like the paper is just kind of stacking, right? Like it's just stacking different papers onto different things, creating what we would perceive as sound, but it's, you know, it's a lot complex than that, of course. So the first thing I want to talk about is like with the time lapse, right? So it's really confusing because, you know, you don't know where to start. You don't know where things end. Oh, should I start here? Should I start here? Should I start here? What really helps me is kind of, if you're new, you know, you can go to this here. See this white bar that's on top of the whole time lapse? You can expand this. You can shorten it. You can make it however long. But basically, it's like a highlighter, right, of that section on the tracks, right? So if I wanted to, you know, take like that clap again. Whoops, that's not how you spell clap. If I take a clap and I drag and drop this sample onto it, and all I did for that was I literally just search clap, find the clap that I like, and then I drag and dropped it onto the measure, right? Because these are measures. This is still music, you know, to some degree. And so we have this clap, and if you can, like I mentioned, if you can see, the clap starts on 0.00 seconds. So it's the very beginning. When you click on this highlighter, you can actually right-click the beginning of it, and you can turn it on set song to start time here. That means whenever I play the song, it'll always start wherever I put the highlighter at the starting point, right? And so it's at 0.00 seconds, so it starts 0.00 seconds. So if you wanted to start a song, you'd probably want to start at 0.00 seconds, preferably if you're getting new. If you're new and you're just getting used to it. So basically, you can kind of see that this is how you can kind of begin to create music, right? You can take these samples, you can drag them and drop them. You can use instruments, which is, like I said, it's a little more advanced. So go to other people's stuff for that. This is like a basic, just kind of overview of Ableton and how you would even approach it, right? So we have some samples. We threw them on the time lapse, so you can see that from the 0 second marker to the that end, whatever that is. What is that? 6 seconds, I think. Yeah, to that, whatever this marker is, right? That's when like it ends, right? But then I want you to also take note of this. Like there are these numbers right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? So these numbers are essentially the bars in the measure. And if you know anything about music, then that makes sense. But if you don't, I'll explain it. Basically, there needs to be 4 beats in each bar, and then after 4 bars, it'll make like a measure, one measure, right? So we have like this whole fucking, or like one. This is one measure, right? Because there's 4 beats. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 4 beats there, right? So that's 4 beats. And if we duplicate it, we have another 4 beats, and we duplicate it, another 4 beats, duplicate it, another 4 beats, right? So this would be a full measure, right? So you can see that this is kind of similar to music in a way, but it's not necessarily the same because it's a lot more versatile. It's a lot more, you can change things. So you see that these snares are here, right? And we're not really going to go over like music theory and song structure and anything like that. We're just talking about Ableton, right? So that's pretty much how you would approach it. Now, another thing you can do is there's a button on this top right here. It looks like a rectangle and an arrow in it. Now this rectangle and the arrow just means loop. All it's going to do is loop the highlighted selection. So like I said, this is the highlighter, and you want your highlighter over, preferably want to keep it within these, like a 4 bars. Like you want to keep it within these 4 bars, right? And what that will do when you're building some song structure, then you're going to kind of understand that it's going to be rhythmic in nature, right? Because you're constantly keeping, like, you know, music is essentially numbers, you know. So if you keep these numbers safe, like, you're going to be fine. You know, you don't want to have a song you know, you don't have a section that's like, you know, 1 extra bar, because by doing that, it's going to ruin the song structure, right? So that's a little tip for that. But going on further, you can see that this is kind of how you would begin to write a song. Well, there's several other things happening here. These are the tracks, like I mentioned. There's 2 types of tracks. I believe there might be 3, but right now we're looking at 2. There's 2 types of tracks. There's an audio track, and if I make one, this is what it will look like. This is an audio track. Yours will look different from mine because mine is a preset saved version. But essentially, the only thing you can put on these is audio, right? So if I try to take like an instrument like Serum, and I try to put Serum on top of this, it's going to say, no, you can't do that, because it must be on a MIDI. Now, the next type of track is a MIDI track. So like I said, there's 2. There's the audio track and the MIDI track. The audio track is for audio samples, MP3s, things like that, right? And then the MIDI track is designed for instruments such as Serum or a VST, or you know, even some VSTs need it to operate. They need to be in a MIDI because the audio is designed for those sound files, right? And not like a whole software, which is what, you know, a VST is, if you're not familiar. If you don't know what VST means, you hear that word thrown a lot. It means virtual software. Like, it just means it's like, it's something real, but it's just virtual, and it's just software. So all that is this is all an audio track. That's why I can do the drag and drop. But if this was a MIDI track, I can't necessarily do the same thing. Now, the differences we can kind of go over for a little second, but I don't want to talk about it too much. Let's, for example, hey, I like that clap. I am going to throw it on a MIDI. Oh no, I did the wrong one. Crap, well, it's asking me this question. I don't know what the fuck this question is. So basically, there's 3 types of modes that you can use in MIDI if you want to use an audio sample in a MIDI. So you can use, so let me explain as well. You can use an audio in a MIDI, but you can't use a MIDI on an audio, okay, or a VST. So MIDI is very versatile. You can do a lot of different things with it, but audio is very strict. You have to have like audio on it. So if you do drop something in a MIDI and you're like, fuck, I think I broke something, there's simple ways to get out of this. You know, a very famous one. Let's say, you know, I'm clueless and I drag and drop this into the MIDI on accident, and I don't want to get stuck. Oh, if my computer will let me do it. Right. Just can paste it. Right. So I don't know which one to do, so I accidentally press like harmonize, right? Oh, great. Now I have this thing. Well, thank goodness for technology, we do have a button called Control Z. Now Control Z will just revert your last choice. So let's say you took something and you accidentally deleted it. Oh crap, I really wanted that piece. You can Control Z and it will revert it back. The interesting thing about Ableton compared to other software, if you're from FL Studios, if you come from Mac Studios, there's a few quirks, right? FL Studios, if you wanted to Control Z, it would only go back and forth. You can only do the previous and then or revert it. You can't go back, right? With Ableton, we do have that luxury where if I delete this, delete that, delete that, delete that. Oh crap, I was on the wrong audio thing. You can Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, Control Z to kind of restore where you're at. Let's say you were maybe a few steps ahead and you deleted a couple on even more on accident. Well, you can also Control Z and it'll just keep going back with no repercussions. Which is a super big plus if you are going from FL to Ableton. That's something very important to know. So you feel free to make mistakes because you can recover from them. Where FL Studios, it would be baked in and you would be screwed. So with that's Control Z basically. Let's talk a little bit about MIDI because I want you guys to understand if you do make any mistakes, you can come back for them. It's not too late. So let's go ahead and accidentally drop this into a MIDI. So, oh no, I accidentally dropped into a MIDI. So these 3 prompts basically is asking you, would you like it to be converted into a harmony? And it will do its best to map whatever it is. Like, for example, it doesn't really work with a clap, but let's say I take like a chord progression, right? From like this, right? And I want, oh, hey, I like these chords. You can drag and drop it to the MIDI, and then you have these 3 prompts. It can convert it into a MIDI pattern in a harmony and do its best to replicate what it hears, but sometimes it doesn't always work, but it is fun to try different ideas. The melody option, if let's say these are chords, right? These are chords that would like stack, and then there would be a melody on top of that. Well, let's say you want to take a melody and you want it to be in MIDI. That's what you would do, is you would take that audio and you would slap it in there, and it would convert it the best it can to melody. Same thing with drums. So sometimes you'd be dealing with a drum sample. Let's say a drum loop, right? Okay, I like this drummer loop, and maybe you want to mix some things around, or maybe you want to take a certain section out of it. MIDI offers that, much like audio. So once again, it's going to ask me harmony, melody, or drums. Well, let's say I make a mistake, you know, I'm kind of new to this and I make a mistake. I place harmony. What it's going to do is convert that, like I said, into a MIDI, into a harmonic form, right? But because we're dealing with drums, whoops. Because we're dealing with drums, as you can tell, it kind of struggles with that, right? It struggles with like finding like what it's supposed to be. So what you can do is you can simply use that drum mode, and it will track these a lot better. I'm going to explain what MIDI is, right? To the best of my ability, because I don't fully understand it. I think I do. But yeah, so basically all it did was it took all of the sound points that it heard from the actual sample and converted them into a MIDI pattern. Now, a MIDI pattern, a way you can think about it is it basically is like a giant piano, right? And it tracks everything, all the notes that are being played, right? And it shows you them on a bar. So what you're looking at right here, this is, let me go ahead and show you. This is what we call, if you're from FL Studios, you'll know what I'm talking about, but this I would like to call the piano roll. The piano roll just kind of shows all of the piano keys, and you can see from C to B1 to A1, it goes all the way up and goes all the way down. So what you kind of need to understand too is the C2. You see the C2 and then you see a C1 here, right? So all that means is it's just showing you what octave it is, right? So if I played, like if I grab a piano, and once again, I'll show you this too, so you can see this in slow motion. I added a MIDI track I'm going to go to type, like say any piano. I'm going to type in piano, and it's going to give me a piano. Cool. Well, I just double click it and it will automatically load in it. No need to drag, no need to drop. So the first thing it is right there. Oh no, I play it and I can't hear a noise. We'll go over triggering a little bit more in a second, but basically the piano is on the MIDI rack, and basically the MIDI is going to play, everything that I play is going to come out as a piano. The notes that I'm playing are still the same. However, the instrument changes. So you can have over 100,000 instruments, but the notes that you are saved and playing are still going to be the same, which is the amazing thing about MIDI. Is because, you know, if you were back in the 60s or the 70s and you played this piano part and, oh, I don't like that piano, I'm going to try it on a different piano, you would have to replay the whole thing. Where we're at with MIDI, you can take that saved piano and you can just swap out different instruments. Thank goodness we're in the future, right? So let's talk about arming real quick. So there's a few things going on here. Don't get too confused. Next to the yellow thing right here, these yellow squares, whenever you see yellow, basically all that means is that selection has power. You have activated it. It is on, if you will, right? So if I have this and it's not yellow, it's off, right? There's no signal coming through it. But if I turn it back on, it is fully on, and you need to be aware of that, because sometimes you'll turn something off and turn it on and then forget about it. So remember to check these always, right? So you can see what's going on, right? Like I said, it's like paper, right? But then at the same time, paper stacking. It's like paper stacking. But at the same time, you have the audio coming in from one place and going out through the master. So the audio, this is called signal pathing, right? So the signal we call in music production a signal, basically sound, anything that has you know, sound, right? So the signal starts somewhere, right? And that being in the time lapse, it starts from where we're at, right? So 0, 0, it starts from there, right? And as soon as we turn it on, like this clap, for example, the clap is going through all of these different channels and then coming out through the master. So what's happening is, as you can see, this is there's like sub gates, like and I want you to think about gates, right? Like the signal is coming through and leaving out the master. So there's gates before it leaves the master. That's essentially what's happening. Is there's all these different gates kind of changing the sound as it leaves to exit the master. Kind of like if you're going through a store, right, and you're buying a bunch of items, you like take all the items, right, and then you go through the checker and then you leave through the door. Well, the store itself, you know, that whole thing, that's what the sound is doing. It's going through all these different steps before it actually leaves the master. So back onto this, there's different things that we can talk about. Arming. This is a piano, and let's say I want to use the piano. Well, the first thing I would do is have to arm it. These are all in the same spot. It's all on the far right. It's a little circle button, and it needs to be red, right? And that means it's on. And if you want to select multiple at once, you can hold Control, and you can arm several different things. So if you want to use 2 different instruments at the same time, you can arm them at the same time. So that needs to be on. Another thing that needs to be on here is this up here. I don't know if you can see it. I'm sure you can see it. Oh. Yes. So there is a computer. Okay. There is a little piano on the top right next to the MIDI, where it says MIDI, right? Like right here. There is a key and then there's a piano, right? So we need to have that piano on. What that piano does is essentially, if I have a piano set up, or I'm trying to just play a sound through my computer and just like press a key and the sound will come through, this needs to be activated, as well as the arm. The arm it's like a selector tool, right? So if I want to use my piano or I want to play my keyboard and hear what that sound sounds like, I need to press the piano button and I need to arm whatever instrument I want to use. Like I said, you can arm several, but most of the time you're going to want to be arming one at a time so you can hear what it does. So now that this cheap electric piano has been armed, I'm going to press a key and see what happens. See, now we have sound. So what's happening is the MIDI is coming through. The instrument is basically like masking the sound, and that sound is leaving the output through the master, right? Right? So that's what's happening with this instrument. And if we go back to the example here with the drums, if I take these drums and I drop them where the piano is, all that's going to happen is it's going to mask these notes. These are notes, like I said, on the piano roll. This is the piano roll. And if you want to get to this, you just double click this little, where this square is, right? And so you can kind of see here that this is kind of a pattern, right? It's kind of like a musical pattern, right? So let's go ahead and hear it. I just turned on the loop button. Let's go ahead and hear what it sounds like. And if you want to hear the whole thing, you can press spacebar. If you followed along with me, you can make sure you set the song start time at the beginning of the highlighter. This is the highlighter, the white thing on top. You make sure that at 0 seconds, and then you press the play button or the spacebar. See, now we have music. Now, the amazing thing about this whole application is, let's say I don't like that at all. Control Z. I can literally remove the entire thing. Or, you know, if I want to, I can expand that on an idea. And it's just fine. So something I want you to kind of ingrain into your brain as much as possible is, imagine if you were working on like a 50-page essay, right? And every time you write something good, right, you need to like, you know, like what if your computer crashes? You need to make sure that you save. You're constantly saving, right? And if you want to quickly save, what I would recommend is get used to the hotkeys rather than ruining your workflow and going to File and Save. But we'll get more into that. But more importantly, make sure you press Control S, and that is how you can save your work. You can save it no matter what, because I've had situations where the computer would just crap out on me when there's nothing on the time lapse. You know, or I just open it and it crashes, you know. So you want to make sure you're constantly saving, because you never know with this application, because there's so many things happening behind the works when it comes to this software and this technology. So yeah, so we have our little song here, a little tune, and I also have my BPM on. I'm going to turn it off so that way I can hear the tune. Wonderful. So there's a couple of things happening here, right? Like, we have an audio clip playing, we have a MIDI clip playing, and they're both leaving the master. So now that we discussed MIDI and audio, and kind of what we're looking at with the time lapse, I want to go over some other stuff on this right side, so it's not too confusing. Don't be afraid of this side, because everything is pretty much the same once you see it. So like I said, there's two forms of tracks, right? You have the audio, and I'll go ahead and rename it to audio track, and then a MIDI, right? So we have two, and basically all this happening is these are like mini masters, right? They're not mini masters, but mini gates, like I was saying with the store. It's like a gate. It's like another gate. So what's happening is these are going through here, and if we go through this side, this is coming out through here. It's coming out through here. This is a level. We would call this is the levels here. Now I can find these tracks. See, we're here. We have the audio track, and we also have the MIDI track. Oh, it's right here. Yep. So there we have these two tracks. And just like we saw in the normal one, it's the exact same thing. These audio tracks are coming through here, they are leaving out of here, just like we see here. They're coming down and out, and they're going to the master. What I really want you to consider is that this right here, this green stuff, this is what we refer to as levels. You know, when you see people like mixing and mastering and doing all the levels and stuff. So all this is basically, it's think about it more of like the signal, right? When I say signal, I mean sound wave, sound, whatever kind of power, whatever kind of pressure is going through the track to the master. That signal is being monitored, right? We can see it. We can physically see what the signal is doing to the signal flow. And signal flow, like I said, is the same thing. It's all just fancy words, but it really is the same thing. Signal flow is all of the flowing of the signals, right? And so the signals, so the sounds, where they're going. We can monitor the sounds, how they look, and where they're going. In real time. Thank God we're in the future again. So we can see that this sound is coming at 0 decibels. Now I don't want to explain decibels too much and all of this stuff, because I would recommend watching someone who's more versed in this stuff, because I understand it, but not to a complexity that some of these other folks do. So basically you can kind of see that we are monitoring the signal flow. The signal flow is coming out of the master, and if you look at the master, you can see that it's also 0 decibels. So that's all that's happening. Those green things, we can see what the signal is doing. Now, if you can kind of see, there are 4 bars in there, right? There's 2 on the top, but focus on those bottom 2 bars. These are just the left and right channels, the left and right signal, right? Because when a signal comes, when a sound comes, it has left and right audio channels, right? It comes, like, you've heard of mono, you've heard of stereo, right? These things are different directions in the speakers, right? So mono just means everything is in the middle, like smack down in the middle to a mathematical accuracy, right? And then the left and right, right? These things are usually distributed fairly, and you want to keep that kind of as a fundamental when making music. You want to keep these things balanced. You don't want one of your like hi-hats all the way to the right, and then your snare all the way to the left, and your bass all the way to the right, because what that does is we're also in the business of music industry, right? So we have to consider that this music needs to be perceived, and it needs to be a certain way, right? Like, like I said, if you want your snare all the way on the right and your hi-hat all the way to the right, and everything's going to sound and come on the right speaker and the right headphone, that's what's going to happen. And if you do that to your audience, the brain is very simple in a way, if it likes simple things. So balance is kind of key there. So you want things balanced between the left and right, right? So if I send a signal and I can see that there's too much coming on the left side or too much coming on the right side, then I might want to change something about that signal so that way it's fair on the balancing spectrums, right? So that's essentially what's happening. Now I'm going to press tab again. We're going to go back to the time lapse. Next thing that I wanted to kind of break down this some more. So these things, the all instruments, this stuff is a little bit more advanced. So go ahead and hold off on that. Same thing with the in and auto. All that is just kind of like, you can take, how there's sound coming from this, right? That's kind of where I'm at with the auto mode. And then the in, you can take sound from something else, or you can take the sound from itself. So like I said, this gets a little more advanced. So I guess hold off on that stuff until you're a little more advanced, and then kind of educate yourself. So you see this blue thing with the 0? This blue thing with the 0. It's kind of a turquoisey color, I guess. This is just like what we were looking at with the master, right? Several gates doing the exact same thing. This is another gate, another gatekeeper, if you will. And because it's at 0 decibels, that means it's at basically like it's at its peak, right? It's at its loudest it can be right now. So basically what's happening is I can turn this down and it'll start going down negative amount, right? From 0. So basically what's happening is 0 is kind of like a place that's been set to to just describe like what like a normal sound kind of is, and then like if you want to turn it down, you would go -0, right? And it's a little confusing. I would recommend looking it up the best you can, because I can't really explain it the way I want to. Yeah, and if you go over 0, you're gonna start seeing things like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now what this is doing is it's over the kind of limits that you would want for audio, because sometimes the audio signal, like let's take this clap, or actually let's take this little noise here. See how it's kind of quiet? Let's boost it up to a +6. You can't really tell, but it did make the sound louder. Now we'll talk, that's a little bit more mixing and mastering stuff, but it did make the sound louder. And that could be problematic in the future, but we'll talk about that later. So another thing here, we have the kick and snare. This is kind of just saying like, where is it going to come out of? And so what you need to look at when it says like where it's coming out of, right? So there's the in, which is the top part, and out. It's always like that. It's like in comes in and then out, right? So all that's happening is you get to choose what you want to go in, and then you get to choose where it goes out. So I have something called groups. I created groups so I can do several things to several different sounds or tracks. So I have audio track and a MIDI track. What I like to do, let's say I'm doing some drums and I want to add some kick. Yep, that's the kick. Yes, so these are audio tracks. So I'm going to drag an audio track into, if it'll let me, okay, into an audio track. Right? Very simple. Very simple. That's a little more advanced. Don't worry about that. That stuff is you'll learn that over time. So what I'm doing right now, yep, see? I have 2 audio tracks playing. And if you followed along earlier, we're in a loop, so it's just going to keep playing back and forth. Now, then, like I said with the groups, I took both of these tracks, and what I do is you can press Control G, and it will, boom, put it in a group. But like I said, all you need to think about this with signal flow, right? So it's these signals going through, and when you take a group, you put that group into another gate before it goes to all of those other gates. So I can add 3 groups if I wanted to. I can make 3 groups, which means just in that little section, there's 3 more groups before it goes to its own even processing, right? And processing, we just means like, you know, like that track affects, you know, things that we can do later on, post processing, right? That's what we call processing. So right, so I can put them in groups, and that's Control Group G, and that's how I would put things in groups. So that way, if I want to do several things to one thing, if I want to give several instruments, you know, a flanger, if I want to give several instruments a reverb, you can put them in a group and run that whole thing. So that way, it's all together. Now, with these groups, like I said, you can change where it exits, but sometimes it can be a little weird where you do it. So make sure you're kind of more educated on how you want to approach these things, because sometimes it can be a little tricky. So most of the stuff on the right side, you're going to want to leave alone, right? I'll be a little more specific too. See here. Yeah, and if you want to ungroup it, you can right click, you can go over to it, and you can simply just ungroup it. It'll allow you to do that through the selections. Oh my goodness. Okay, I had to go down here because I didn't want to cover it. Yes, so you can also see that there's columns, right? So this first column has all the track names. Let's say I want to rename something. You can press Control 2. Oh, you can press Control R. And if you press Control R, it'll highlight that name of that track. So I can name it, you know, Rick and Morty. I can name it whatever I want, you know. If these are the bases, it's best for your own fundamentals to be enrooted, to just remember, that the more clean you are when producing from the start, from the moment you open your DAW, the more clean and labeled you make your stuff, the easier the process will be. Because when I started out, I would just name stuff that, right, and it would just be that. Now, what will happen is when you transfer these to like more of a serious setting, you're going to be like, what is this? What does this do? Right? So it does pay a lot to have things kind of like named and ready. So you can go, oh, I have to go to the basses. Oh, I have to go to the claps. Oh, and these are the claps. You know, okay, I need to go to the claps. Boom, there's the claps, right? It's in your brain, just simpler, right? And if you do approach a different stage in your production career where you're trying to collaborate with other folks or even show people some of your work, it's going to be easier for you to kind of like know what's happening in the DAW, in your own kind of outlay of what's happening here, right? So these are the sections. That's how you make a group. You control G, and if you want to undo it, you can simply right click and it will allow you to ungroup it. And you can also change the name from Control R. That will highlight it. You can change it. Make sure you name everything as much as possible. Okay. Now that's like the first column, just the naming and tracking of and grouping of all the tracks, right? We also have the next column, which is, we kind of went over that. It just has like in, out, auto. It has like the ins, outs, all that stuff. Like where's the signal being sent, right? Before that, these are all tiny little gates, right? Then you have one more final gate. Then, like I mentioned before, the yellow thing is the power. If anything is yellow, it has power. It's on. So if I turn this off, it's off. So if I play it, oops, this is the right one. Yeah, no, this is the clap, right? So if I turn the clap off, right, no power to it. Now when we put power in it, there's different things you can do to it. We already discussed arming. If I wanted to arm this track and I wanted to, you know, record it or do something special with it, that's when you would use the arming or play it. Now, you can only play it on MIDI, which is kind of weird, but you can do different things with the arming, but it's a little more advanced, and I would recommend kind of exploring all of Ableton before, like, actually getting committed to your production, because when you do get committed to your production, you're going to want your products to kind of, you know, stick to, you know, like something understandable for you, right? You want to get used to this software before you know, it's much like you can't run before you walk, right? You can't ride a motorcycle if you can't ride a bicycle, you know, it just doesn't make sense. So the way I like to think about it, this is a fucking motorcycle with like 30 wheels, right? This is fucked up. So yeah, so that's all that's happening with the power. That's what's happening with the arming. Now the last thing is the S. I would recommend watching other people, watch their tutorials, watch their breakdowns, watch everything, because the faster you get used to Ableton, the faster you're going to be able to make the music and the sound you want. So with this S, all it is solo. So let's say I'm playing a song and I want to do something like hear this specific spot and see what it sounds like compared to everything else. That's something you're going to do very often. What does this sound like in relationship with everything happening in the song? So here we have the kick. I want to hear what the kick sounds like. The S, all it means is solo. And by clicking it, it's going to solo this group, but within the group, it's going to solo that track. That's all that means. So you'll see this half blue marker here. That's all it means, is that in that group, there is something being soloed, right? So if I go to play my song and I'm like, yay, check the song out. Why isn't it playing the rest of the song? Make sure nothing is being soloed, right? Make sure that you turn it off, and you can simply click it on, click it off. If there's any blue, it's on. If it's not blue, it's off. That's just a solo section right there. Now, let's say, like I said, you want to turn it off, you click it off. Everything should be working just fine. Now let's talk about if you want to solo two different things together at once, because sometimes you're going to need to do that. Well, I want to see the relationship between the kick and the piano. So all you would do is simply give it a left click, turn it on, give it power, Then you're going to go to whatever instrument, the secondary instrument you want to, and you're going to hold control and you're going to click. Now what that's going to do is select both options. A lot of this stuff is really converts over to PC, like Control Z, Control S, control clicking thing, and then clicking another thing, and you can grab both. A lot of this stuff is pretty much computer. It's very computer friendly if you're very used to using a computer, right? So now I have two things active at once, and I can play them. And so they're playing at the same time, isolated, soloed. So I can hear both of them and what they're doing, right? And let's say I want to hear a third track, a tertiary. I could just control, and then I can select them all. Right? Now they're all soloed. If there were other things happening in the time lapse, they would be excluded. I can only hear what's happening right now. Well, let's say I want to turn it off. You can simply just power off one, and it will power them all off. Well, let's say, I powered off 3, and hey, okay, that one sounds good. I don't want to hear it anymore. You could just do the same thing, control and click off the one that you want off. Boom. So now the first two that are on continue to be on, so I can keep listening to my song and finding things that I want and don't want from isolating things and seeing how they sound with everything else, their relationship with each other, right? That's more song structure stuff, but those are little nuggets, so I think that's helpful. So that's pretty much what's happening on the right side. I was really scared to look at all this stuff and see how it all works together, but hopefully this can help kind of explain what's happening here, right? Now, like I said, this is a time lapse, and you can add as many tracks as your computer allows you. If you are on Ableton Lite, unfortunately, you are limited to 8 tracks. That's how it is. You can't get through it. But I would recommend making some investments into Ableton Standard or even Suite if you're in that realm. I know it's like $900, but the reality is, the sky is the limit. And if you do want to take some music production seriously, I would start with Standard. It's probably about $400. If you come from FL Studios, it's going to be even worse because you're already down $200, and then you got to pay another $400 just to get in the skin of the game of Ableton. Just to be just as frustrated as I was. But the reality is that Ableton is much like FL Studios, very versatile. You get your money's worth. Even if you're not doing audio production, you can work with movies, you can work with videos. I've seen people do crazy things with FL Studios. So that's just, the limits are insane. So this is all we're looking at here, right? We have our library. That's what I would like to refer to it as, collections. It says collections here, but it's kind of a library of all the samples I've acquired and downloaded onto my computer. Other people's samples that are already starting in Ableton. When you start, you'll have stock plugins. We call them plugins because they're just VSTs, but they plug right in, right? And so they have different options for you that you can download from Ableton, or even free options that you can get from other providers, and even purchase different ones. And essentially all that is you're just buying different instruments, or different if you play guitar or any instruments, we call them like a foot pedal, right? Like it's like an effect rack. It's basically, you can buy different effect racks, but they're digital versions, and they'll do different things, right? So let's talk about the rack section here, down here, what we have here. So like I said, there's two different tracks. There's audio track and a MIDI track. But if you go to these tracks, you'll see that this section right here is always vacant, right? Or there's usually something there, but majority of the time it's going to be vacant. Now, what this is, much like I discussed with signal flow, there's gates, right? There's gates between each. You can set these gates, right? You can have a bunch of gates, right? Eventually, you're gonna end up with hundreds of gates, because there's a bunch of things going through. The channels are going through different things before they leave the master. So let's say I have that clap, and I really like that clap. So we're gonna isolate that clap using the solo button. Boom. Now the clap is isolated. Cool. Now it's playing left or right. Cool. We're cooking. We're cooking we're cooking in the shop, right? So that kick sounds really good, right? Well, let's say I wanted to try something different. This is where I would recommend watching other people. This is, like I said, I'm going to say that several times until it gets into your head. Watch other people, because they'll show you things that I cannot show you in one video. But there's different things that you want to do to sounds, audio or MIDI, that may make it sound different or may make it sound special in a way. For example, something we often use in dubstep or even in fucking Grammy award-winning, production. I'm talking like billions of dollar production. These people use something called transient shaping. Now, transient shaping is essentially what a transient is kind of the highest. It's like the highest peak part of the sound, right? So when you see a sound wave, right? So let's take a sound wave like a wub, like a dubstep wub, right? We refer to them as basses. But if you go ahead and look at this bass, right, you can see that there's a couple things happening within this bass, right? So let me explain this as well. So these audio tracks are not just simply audio tracks, right? Of course they are, but we can see them, like I said, where it's starting, the sound is starting somewhere, the signal flow is going somewhere, and the signal flow is leaving. So what we're seeing in real time is the wave form, the shape of the wave form, which is, as you can see, it's kind of that like bell looking thing, right? You can see these wave forms, that's what they are. And the wave forms are taking up spots on the bar and the beats, right? So you can see what's actually happening to the bar, where the waveform is starting, where the waveform is ending. We can see what the waveform looks like through its actual presentation. You can see that here. And also you can, thank goodness, you can see how loud it is and how much pressure it's putting into the signal flow. Remember that we're not just working with sound, right? Sound is maybe 2/3 of it, right? Another thing, sound is maybe 1/3 of audio production, because like the other half is like how the human ear and the human body reacts to it, right? And then another part of it is how the technology that we have can handle that sound. Because, like I said, you can see the waveform, right? You can see what we call the dynamic range. And the dynamic range just means how much loudness, how much pressure is getting put through that track into the gate, out through all those signal flow and out through the master. How much pressure and volume is coming out. Now you can kind of see it's kind of pathetic, right? It's kind of like a cute little, like it's kind of just like a cute little, right? It's like it's small, right? But what's happening is it's not a lot of pressure, right? That's what that really means. It's not a bunch of force. It's not a bunch of pressure. But if you go and look at the clap, you can see that bell form is a lot more robust and a lot more full. Now all that means, you can hear it in your ears. It's louder. There's more things happening, right? Now if we go back to our example here, you can see that this section is kind of the loudest. Well, let's go ahead and take it and boost it up a little bit, right? A bit like I was saying here, right? So we go to the 0, right? This is what we'd call the processing. Once again, this is like the processing section. And I'm going to take that 0 and I'm going to boost it up to 6, right? So I want you to take a second and just guess what will happen, right? Like your first answer immediately should be distortion. Now, you're not really going to hear it, but I'll kind of boost it just so you can kind of see. But what's happening here is the signal. That's actually a good example, so you can see what's happening, right? So this, I guess we can start here, right? So we're looking at the audio track. We're looking at the wave form in this track. If I click on the track, just like I did, if I double click, just like I did with the MIDI, I can view the waveform in a different format, right? So all this stuff here is just different things that I can do to the waveform. And the waveform reads just like it does on the time lapse, just like it does on the time lapse, left to right. So you can see that it starts here, the next part starts here, and the next part starts here, right? And we can talk about sound structure a little bit more another time. But that's all that's happening, right? So there's different things that you can do to that waveform while you're viewing it. And it's kind of like monitoring it right now, right? It's like you see it, but then you like have a microscope, right? And then you can kind of see even more into the audio. There's a few things that are important. Everything else is kind of like find out for yourself and experiment and learn more, because I don't really feel like, I understand it well enough to explain it once again. So this is transpose. And transpose is like a fancy word that just means like to change the frequency of this waveform, right? And when you change a waveform's frequency, if you haven't learned about frequency is basically kind of like, there's hertz, right? There's different types of frequencies. Like you can think about it in a 3-band way: lows, mediums, highs. You can also think about it numerically. There's let me pull up EQ. There's different types from this side, the lower side of things, the left side, to the right side, right? And you have different frequencies. You have their low frequencies, high frequencies, mid frequencies. So basically when you change the frequencies of the whole waveform, it's just going to change the pitch, right? And that's something you can kind of look up yourself and why it works, but I fail to remember how it works exactly right now. But it's essentially the frequencies, because all notes are essentially frequencies. And when you change the frequency, it changes the note. But it's a little more complicated than that. So transpose, if I turn this up 2, it changes the frequency 3 semitones. And if you don't know semitones, check that out, how to learn it. So all it did was change it, right? And if I go up to like 9 semitones, it's going to turn that whole sound wave up 9 semitones. But mathematically, it's just moving the frequency. It's the same thing, right? So that's one thing you can do. Some other things you can do is you can set the BPM. So sometimes a sound will be perfectly in sync with the BPM that you have set here. This is the BPM 150. And you can change that so that it can move and see. As you can see there on the time lapse, it can change and stretch, right? So I can have it do completely different things just because I'm moving the BPM around, right? And the pitch. We already have some ideas for some song ideas. Divide by 2, I think I've discussed that in my breakdown. You can take a sound and you can divide it by 2, and all that does is it just will, if you know anything about division, obviously it'll make it smaller, right? So now it's 2 times as fast. If I multiply it, it'll go back to normal. If I multiply it again, it'll be 2 times as slow, right? So very simple concepts, very logical, right? And so that BPM, as you can see, it went from 150 to 300, right? And we can go back. 150 divided by 2 takes us to 75. So that's all that's happening there, is it's just changing the BPM. So it's not really changing the sample altogether as much as it's changing how the sample is played. Okay. So that is kind of what's happening here with sound and monitoring it. And if you want to do that again, you'd go and click on it, double click, and it will let you do that function. Same thing with the clap. These are the sound wave stuff. This is how you do that. And it will also work for a MIDI, right? So this is where the piano roll is. And you can see that all this stuff is very familiar, isn't it? A lot more advanced, obviously, being able to do different chords and keys and triggering and legato and things like that. That's all just kind of instruments and different ways you can expand. But yes, it's essentially the same thing happening. This is kind of the monitoring section, right? Now let's go to the audio effect racks. So this is where all the dope stuff's happening, right? So we have this sound, and it's a sound wave coming through a gate, going through another gate, going through another gate, going through another gate, and then leaving through the output. But within one of those first few gates that it comes through, the sound comes through the time lapse. We have the option basically on this, the tracks right here in that column where those tracks are, we can change the audio as how it is. I'll just show you a quick example because this is a little more advanced stuff as well. But this is where you would begin to be putting flangers, EQ, delay, reverb. This is where you'd put these effects, much like if you know anything about guitar. If you don't know anything about guitar, I'll explain it. You know, like you play your guitar, the sound comes out of the chord, it goes into a foot pedal or an amplifier, but some people like foot pedals, and then it goes, if it goes to a foot pedal, it goes to an amplifier, and then it comes out of the amplifier, right? So that's how sound would work. But essentially, we're taking that foot pedal and we're turning it into a digital version. That's all that's changing, right? And this is where you can see it by clicking on this bracket, and you can select and you can add, drag, and drop wherever you would like, right? So let's go back to that example with the flanger. If I grab me flanger here, I can double click, it'll automatically add it, right? So now we have a flanger. I also want you to kind of take a moment to look at this. These are, see that when it has like a sound thing inside of it, that's square? All that is just saying this is an MP3, this is an audio track. So you'll need to take that audio track, and that will need to go into an audio track. Very logical. If you see that square thing, that just means it's an instrument or it's an effect rack, or an effect, you know, a VST effect, anything. Like the foot pedal, like I mentioned. So we drag and drop that flanger in there, and because it's yellow, we have power. This is yellow. All that mode means is just that you can shorten it, you can make it smaller, you know, because if you have a bunch of instrument, I'll show you kind of in a second. But yeah, if it ever gets stuck like this, just double click it, it'll come back to normal. So this is you know, an effect. I'm not going to explain what it does and how it works and all that stuff, but I will explain what's happening. It's another gate, right? So there's a sound. It's leaving, signal wave, goes through a gate, leaves out of the master. This is one gate that we can stop it with and change its effect. Now let's hear what the sound sounds like. Now let's add a flanger and see what it sounds like. Now the sound has completely beginning to evolve into a different sound, creating you know, that kind of musical idea where you can make different things happen and have a simple sample turn into, you know, a festival banger or a fucking, you know, a platinum hit. You know, look at Dr. Dre. Dr. Dre has produced so much music, and same with there's some other folks who are using fucking splice, the drag and drop samples, you know, and it's kind of the same thing here. You know, I think even T-Pain is using splice, and it's just simple. You take the audio track, you put it on the audio track, it goes in, goes out the master, and then you can affect it here, right? So if I want to add some reverb, kaboom, I can double click it, it'll land right into the signal flow. And the signal flow is much like I said with the gates, right? Everything is very literal. So if I put the flanger first, the flanger is going to activate first, then the reverb is going to activate because it's next. So the gate kind of concept of things, how they need to go, is very in order, right? So if I want the reverb to happen before the flanger, I would need to drag and drop the reverb so it is before the flanger. So the reverb would happen before the flanger. But if I want the flanger to happen before the reverb, I put the flanger in front of the reverb. So doing that, let's hear what the sound sounds like. It's already becoming something completely different, even more so. Now, we can even add things like delay, right? Because I'm not really going to explain effects and how to like process them and order or organization, but I will explain that it's very important to keep everything kind of, you know, like I was saying, like you don't want to disorient your fucking, you know, your listener. You don't want them to have a goddamn seizure, right? You want to make a musical structure. You want them to make a sound, right? Like sounds that can create a song and a structure, right? So in order to do that, you want to kind of keep some sort of sanity within the song. So if you do like a delay or something, you don't want to add 10 delays. You don't want to add 20 delays. You don't want to add 20 reverbs. You don't want to add 30 reverbs and 30 delays. That's just going to sound like chaos, right? So you kind of want more simple is better. The simpler you do your music production, the more it'll pay off. I promise you. So we have these three different sounds doing different things, right? And we all can kind of tell it's chaotic already, but I'm just kind of... right? And so I can do different things with these sounds. And you can kind of hear that the original concept of the sound is still there. But all that's happening is those gates are hitting in the orders that I placed them in. Very logical, very 1, 2, 3. That's how it is, right? And so this has been basically the effect rack, and this is all that happens in the effect rack. Sometimes it can be very complicated if you've seen like Virtual Riot, or you've seen some of these like platinum house producers. Like a lot of the stuff that they're doing is to kind of clean up the signal and to make the signal be delivered to the master as clean as possible and as loud as possible sometimes. Now let's talk about EQing for a second. Just a tiny second. We kind of touched on it a little bit. But if you are using standard, you're going to want to use an EQ8, or you're going to want to buy your own third-party EQ, because there's so much technology with the AIs and with all this different type of software that people study and focus in, that it allows us as music producers to take these shortcuts that are necessary to bring our sound to optimal levels. Now EQ8 is kind of a standard stock version that you're going to have. If you have standard or if you have light, I think you're just stuck with channel EQ, but it's the same concept. Like I said, you want to think about it in 3 bands. You have lows, mediums, highs, right? That's all you see here. The lows are on the left because it's just where all the bass stuff will be picked up in these lower frequencies, right? These lower frequencies. And then you have your higher side, which is the higher frequencies, and then your mid frequency, right? So essentially, you can customize this EQ. And now I want you to think about an EQ kind of like a cookie cutter, right? So it's another gate. It's the same thing as the reverb, same thing as the delay. It's another gate, like before it even goes to its own processing. Like this is the processing part. This is the processing before it even goes into the master. Now the EQ8 is like a cookie cutter, right? So you have your mids, lows, and highs, and your cookie cutter allows you to, if you, let's say, hey, I don't want highs on this, you can literally cut out the highs. The highs you can do you can create like plots on this grid. It's very mathematical, but you can create plots that will cut off certain sections of the frequency as it's being sent, as the signal is being sent through. You begin to see that that the high end is going away, and all we can hear are the mids and the lows. Well, let's do a little test here and go over the lows and see what happens when we cut the lows out. It's much more crisp, much more high-end and like so much more high-end. And the reason is because, like I said, much like the high end being cut out of those 3 bands, we're cutting the low end out, right? Let's try that with the mids. You can do that with the same thing with the mids. This is what the middle section of the frequency band would sound like, right? And all together, right? So now you understand that concept. When people talk about EQ or multi-band or band, they're just referring to the band of frequencies, being high, mids, lows, and everything in between, all the special stuff, right? So these are all the same thing. These are all gates that are happening to the signal before it even leaves the master, before it even leaves its own rack, before it even leaves its own channel, right? So we have these things happening simultaneously with the drums and with everything else. So let's give it a listen. Right, perfect. So that was pretty much how I would explain the effect rack, and it pretty much works the exact same way as the other one. There's several things you can do to kind of, you can like group them, like I said, with the tracks. It's the exact same thing. If you want to group anything, you're gonna want to press Control and G. Or I'm sorry, Control G, right? So they're all in one rack. Now, this is a little more advanced stuff, and I'm not going to go over anything too advanced, but you can tell that they're all in one group because of this thing right here. This thing on the left that has the power. It's like a little tab, right? So all that's doing is just saying that they're all in a group, right? And you don't have to name it. It's pretty much self-explanatory that they're all in a group. If you want to shorten the group, you can double tap it. And now the group is compacted into one thing. So let's say I want to add more stuff. I can add more stuff and that'll still be there, right? Let's go ahead and open it. You double click it, comes back. All of everything you have is saved into one little group. Now, another thing is, let's say you want to hear that sound and you're like, I forgot what it sounds like. You can turn it off. You can turn off the whole group rather than having to turn off each one individually or delete it or do something crazy. You can turn off that whole group, allowing you to, use your ears to listen to other things happening. Right? You can see it's a lot more dry. Okay, now I'm going to add these effects, right? Giving it some life, right? So, okay, now it's completely different. I think I have a good idea. I know where I'm going with this, right? So you can kind of see different things happening with the power of turning things on and off and isolating things, right? You can change things and not have it be so, confrontational with everything else, because you need to isolate and listen to different tracks on their own, so that way each element of the track, let me explain that. Each element of the song can work together, right? The drums can work on their own. The bass can work on its own. The vocals can work on their own. Everything needs to be isolated, so nothing's confrontating each other. And we can talk about compression and EQ and all that stuff in another video, but this is just a breakdown of Ableton and how I would look at it, right? So the last thing I'm going to be talking about is, obviously you have your play, pause, you have your record. If you want to record a sound in there, I could teach you how to do that later in another video. But now we're going to be talking about something a little bit more complex. Remember, this is a software, right? So it does have options, right? So within these options on the top left, you have file, you have edit, you have create, you have view, you have options, you have help, right? So file is where you're going to be able to manage your files, your saves, your templates, they're referred to on this DAW as projects, right? So if you want to find a song that you made like 2 weeks ago, you're going to look for that project. And how you would do that is you would go to file and you would open live set, right? You can also press Control O, but this is where I go to find a track that I want to listen to or that I made or work on. Now, open recent set will only save items that you had open recently, and there's a limit to it. So if you open a song and you open another song, you have to go down those two songs. You have to like scroll and look at the one that you want, and make sure you name all of your songs stuff that you can remember. If there's a catchy drop, or if it's the day's date or something, you want to make sure that you write it down so it's rememberable. So when you want to come back to it, you can easily use the open recent set option. So that will allow you to access them fluidly, so it's not ruining your creative flow. I've had many times, even today, where I'm trying to find a song that I've made and I named it 1 2 3, and so it's completely lost among my sea of songs, right? So you want to make sure your stuff is constantly being named, familiar to the sound, what it sounds like, something something that sticks out, so this is that song, right? So that's file. Edit, there's a couple things on here that are a little more advanced for live performance and things like that, right? But essentially copy, paste, cut, things like that, right? Create, this is also it's another version of create, where it's kind of like just a different way to do something, right? So if I want to insert an audio track, I can click this, boom, it's going to insert an audio track. Where if I really want to click one, I can just right click and go to insert audio track, right? So it's essentially the same thing, right? View, this will change how you look at the layout, right? So that you can look at it in different ways. If you're working with two different tracks and you want to hear how one track sounds or another track sounds and how they sound together, or you're working with someone, this is where you would go for something like that. And different kind of info and stuff like that, right? Options. Now this is kind of the meat and the potatoes of where we're kind of end this video. This is like essentially where you're going to be able to see what's happening and how the application functions, right? So you have like the edit map, edit like key map, like this stuff is a little more interesting because you can you know, take like, you know, like my piano right here. Like if I want to take my piano and I wanted to turn this knob and it does something on that, I would need to map that thing to the piano, right? It's much like MIDI, like I was saying with MIDI, you know, it's mapping, but the only thing is it's more exclusive for, you know, I mean, you can do it for whatever, but it's more exclusive for like live performance, or, you know, if you want to record something live, this is what something you would approach with mapping and things like that, right? Now we'll kind of go through some of this stuff. Most of the stuff really isn't too special to me because I'm so used to having to like, you know, use what I use, but you can change the grid, right? I've explained this in my other breakdown, but if you want to go in triplet grid, you want to go to a bigger grid because you want to see more. Maybe you have a bigger screen or you have several screens and you want to see what's going on. You can change the grid and how it appears to you, right? And you can also have snap to grid. Like sometimes you want it to snap on that bar instead of having it be like a few measures off. You want it to snap onto it. So that's where you would go to make sure it's on, because I've had situations where it got turned off, right? Now preferences. Let's go over to preferences. So preferences is essentially, it's once again, this is like the big boy settings, right? Like this is an application, this is a software still. So this is basically the big boy settings. What's actually happening? How does the software running to your computer, right? So you have different things like the look and feel, right? You can change the color. I can change whatever color I want. I can have it white. I can have it black. I can have it green. I can change the hue. I can do different stuff, right? I can constantly have my my Ableton look differently and feel differently how I want it to, right? You can also change your the color of the clips, how they start. You can change them to red, you can change them to purple, you can change them to blue, you can change them whatever color you want. So that will help you with creating your outlay, so that way it's more customizable to you. You know, if you want your shit to be purple, it can be purple, right? So there's different things on here like sleep mode, but you know, we don't even care about that. A lot of this stuff you're going to want to leave alone because most of it is kind of just set in place, but it gives you the option to change these things. But we don't really want to touch anything, right? So now we have audio device. The way you need to think about this is much like how we are talking about signal flow, right? So we have an audio input device, right? So there's you know, if I wanted to record audio, it's asking what would you like to record the audio with? And so I would be recording with my mic. So it would be the microphone Shure M57 or MV5, right? And it's a waveform, right? The audio, where do you want the sound to come out? So I'm having the sound come out of my my headphones, which is attached to the microphone. But realistically, I would have it coming out of my speakers, which would be a simple auxiliary cord, or I can use my MIDI, you know, my Focusrite, you know, whatever that thing is, I forgot. So you can use that, right? And it will come through that, right? And then the sound will come out of that, right? So it'll prioritize much like the signal flow we were discussed. Same thing. Sample rate, you don't really want to touch any of this stuff. A lot of this stuff kind of just is a little more advanced when it comes to recording and production wise. This is stuff that I want you to actually take the time to learn on your own and study it, because it's kind of its own subsection on how signal and sound travels to the ears, right? Like I said, it's making the music, and audio is only 1/3 of it, right? It's how the ears perceive it, and then it's how the technology can handle it. So the important thing is making sure that the signal can be sent through all those three paths without anything being, you know, corrupted, right? You don't want the sound being corrupted, right? And by corruption, I mean like, you know, distortion or artifacts. And we refer to artifacts as just kind of things that we don't, you know, necessarily want or expect in the original sound, right? So to prevent that, I would recommend leaving the sample rate alone, but I would also recommend that you educate yourself on how this stuff works, so that when you do come to present your audio sound, you can fully present it in the best way possible. Buffer size, latency, all of this stuff. Like I said, go ahead, learn, watch other people's videos on how Ableton works. They will explain this stuff much more in depth and the importance of it, right? But I will stress the importance of it overall. Now, there's different things that you can do. You can test the simulator. The simulator kind of helps you see how your computer's handling things, how is it handling sound, how is it handling frequency. You can do that different stuff, if you need to, but that, also more advanced stuff, but definitely, make sure everything is working on your computer, because if sound's not coming through somewhere, something's wrong within the mix, whether it's a driver, whether it's you just need to reset Ableton. I've had that happen when I first downloaded it. Once you first download it, maybe you make sure you're fully updated on all of the software, and then give it a good reset. And I mean a good reset. And if you have to reset it a couple times, you're not getting signal, contact me, contact someone. There's someone out there who can help you with this information, because there's always something going on with Ableton. The link and this stuff, this is also, once again, more like the mapping. Like I was saying, if I want to map this, I would need to take this, program it to that, and then it would know, hey, there's a device plugged in, and I say, take the control, take my inputs, and I want you to output them through the computer. That's all it's basically talking about, and different things like that. So this is also some more live performance stuff. So if you did want to take, because they perform with Ableton live, if you're not aware of that, and how you would do that is essentially kind of setting up the mapping so you can have that performance, right? File folder, this is where all the juice comes. This is where you can go and select your actual samples, select your VSTs. If you do buy a third-party VST, this is a place you will go. Full file folder, you're going to want to look for your certain folder that VST is in. Make sure you keep everything or maybe this is library. Yeah, no, oops. Yeah, no, I'm in the wrong section, right? So this is I take everything I said back, right? This is kind of like where you will where you're saving files, right? Where your save stuff will go. Like if you want to save something, it's going to go to an actual folder in your computer, and this is where you can find out where it will go and select where it will go, right? And you can also hear, this is actually a cheat code. I didn't know this for the longest time when I was in Ableton. But, like this mode that we have set where I have the basses are grouped, the drums are grouped, the hi-hats are grouped, the snares are grouped, the melodies are grouped, the fucking effects, the sound effects are grouped. Everything is grouped. And let's say, hey, I want to transfer my groups to another project. Well, I can use the save current set as the default, right? So when you open new Ableton, it'll have everything will reset. It'll wipe all of your groups. It'll wipe all your work, all your compression, all your racks, right? You can save it, so that way it'll save it for your next project. So when you open another project file, a new project file, it'll save everything that you've already had. The only thing is, I would make sure that you have the time lapse completely clear. Make sure you have all your effects cleared off the tracks, so that when you do have those groups saved, but those effects from the last song won't be on there. And I can show you how to do that in a different video too, because that's so powerful, and I never really known that for the longest time. So yeah, files and all this stuff. This is kind of like where you're gonna get your downloads and your VSTs, like I was saying earlier. This is where when you download a third party, you're gonna export it, and then you're gonna have all this information. And where it is and all this stuff, right? So you're gonna want to access that and make sure, like, it's basically that Ableton is communicating with your computer to get to these files, right? So you need to tell Ableton where the files are hiding, so Ableton can get the files and put them into the DAW, so you can actually access them, right? And so that's essentially what's happening in the library section. The plugins is the same thing. It's going to be like these are the plugins stuff. You see where it says browse. If you want to look for something, you're going to browse, right? And it's going to take you to a folder that whichever folder you want. It's going to take you through all the different folders, and you're going to find the one where you downloaded it, right? And make sure you clearly label it and you have it somewhere safe, like your desktop or you know, your file programs or something, somewhere where you know where it is. So that way you can put all your VSTs in that one little spot, and you can say, hey, Ableton, they're over there. And Ableton will be like, okay. And it will find all of the VSTs that you have in that folder. Now, next we have the VSTs. What is it? Oh yeah, so the VSTs naturally, I don't know much about the software and how they work together, but some VSTs are very good at telling Ableton, hey, I'm over here, right? And so Ableton will be like, gotcha, there's a VST right there, right? So with the rescan plugin option, this is something you're going to want to do if you have any or when you first start. Because there might be something you don't have, especially if you're coming off FL Studios. There might be some things that it allows you to transfer over, right? So these, the rescan option allows you to find these VSTs that are saying, hey, I'm over here, and quickly adopt them into the DAW. So that way, the digital art workstation, you know, it'll adopt them in very quickly. Rather than having to go and search for them, much like I had to because I'm kind of an idiot. This record, warp, and launch, this is different things that will affect how the Ableton will record or play the actual time lapse. Like I said, it starts from 0 seconds to plus, you know, to keep going on. Well, let's say I want the count in for it, right, to start at like 4 seconds, you know, or like 4 bars, right? Before the song actually starts, it'll go. Do it. Oh yeah, this is more recording stuff. 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4. Right, so that's all that does. This is more live stuff. You know, if you do want to get into that, I can kind of explain a little bit more. I do understand the live aspect of it. I just don't use it as much because, you know, like I was saying earlier, Ableton is very versatile. You can do so many things. You're kind of doing a crime to yourself to limit to one thing. I feel like so many different avenues with music, and especially with software, you know, there's so many things you can do. There's different things like bit rate, you know, a lot of the stuff you're going to be leaving alone because, like I said, if you watch more other people's videos, they'll help explain the importance of the digital aspect of this of the audio signal and how it transfers over through technology to the human ear, right? Like bit depth and sample rate, like these things are kind of like neck and neck. You need to know these, but I don't understand them in a way that would be very, you know, helpful, I guess. Because I can show it, but I can't really explain it, right? Like, you know, if you turn the bit rate down, it's gonna sound like shit, right? If you turn it up to a lot, it's gonna be too much for the computer. But if you have it at a sweet spot, it's going to make the sound, the bits on it, like, are gonna just be, everything's gonna be fucking like peachy, right? Like, everything's gonna sound perfect together, right? Because there's no distortion in the mix of the signal flow, right? So that's pretty much what sample rate and bit depth is basically that transferring through technology to the ears, right? And to the speakers. Whenever I said ears, I also meant like through the speakers, the technology, right? And then to the ears. So there's different things about like setting pre like default modes for things. If you load in an audio file, it usually comes warped, and what that means is I'm at 150 BPM. If I bring in a sound loop at 130 BPM, if I have this mode set to auto warp, it'll automatically warp that 130 BPM to 150 BPM. And if that doesn't make sense, I'll explain it here. Like this here came in at, let's see that, so this is the warp mode right here. All that does is just warps the grid. It warps the waveform to meet the grid, right, the best it can. Listening to like the rhythms and you know, the mathematic precision of the sounds and where they land, where they start, everything. It'll warp them to stretch or shrink to the grid, right? So if I warp it, it'll go to 150, right? But if I turn it up to, or it's naturally 150, right? But if the song is 130 BPM and I want to warp it, and so I'll make it longer, right? You'll see it. It's gonna ask me like, are you sure you want to do that? I'm gonna say yes, and it's gonna warp it to 130, right? It's going to lock it into 130. That's all that means, right? There's a little different things about it. Is sometimes it's not exactly what you think. Like it's sometimes it's a little slower or a little faster. So sometimes you have to move it around, make sure it fits onto those grids, right? So now we're at 130, right? And it is slower, right? You can hear that. So that's pretty much what that does, is just sets the mode. So that way it'll save in that version. You know, you can have it unwarped and have it one shot so it doesn't loop. You can have it warped so it one shot so it doesn't loop. You can have it warped and a loop so it warps but it's also looped. And you can have auto, which means it will kind of auto detect what it thinks it needs to be, which is most of the time it's going to be warped. I think a warped one shot and not a loop. So let me explain a loop real quick. So there's this little button right here, loop. All that does is if you take, you can use it on audio or a MIDI track. All it will do is take from the start of this bar to the end of this bar, and it will just loop it, right? And it just treats it kind of like a ribbon, right? Like it just keeps going and going and going and going. So if I stretch this out, as you can see, this little black marker right there is just indicating that that is the start of the loop and that the loop has repeated, right? So if I play it, right? So you can see that that is the loop section, and that's how it would work. And I have the loop section set here on the clap too. You can see that. That black marker just means that there's a loop. Well, if I take this loop and I stretch it out, and I accidentally press the loop button, oh no, it's gone. Well, the good news is we can Control Z, or we can simply turn it back on and stretch it back out, just like we did the first time, right? Very simple. Now, this is very helpful when you're doing things like hi-hats, or you're doing things like this kick. You see this kick just keeps going, or the bass that I was using, right? Like, you know, different things like that, or, you know, that's a little more advanced with music production, but kind of in like song structure and creativity and stuff like that. But at the same time, it's essentially going to be the same no matter what you're doing it with, right? And I'm just using a hotkey. That's just Control D. That's how you duplicate. But yeah, that's pretty much that part of it. Yes, yes, yes. And now we got a little cook up here. Right? And so right, so that's what you can do with the loop, right? And do a bunch of different stuff. You know, I could take this, I can, you know, I kind of taught you all this stuff, so it's awesome. Now you can kind of like take these skills and move with them. But you can turn the pitch down. You can turn the BPM down. You can mess with the effects. Right, so you can do different things, right, to create different sounds, right? And that's pretty much what the looping does, is just makes it a lot easier, right, for the music production aspect. There's licensing and maintenance. That's just, you know, more legal stuff that they kind of have to put there just to like show their authenticity. But there's like, you know, like different ways that it can launch, you know, like when you first open, it refers to launch as, I believe when you first turn on the software. So when you first like boot it up, like that's what it refers to, launch, right? And you can do different things like tap tempo. Like a lot of this stuff, like I said, is very you know, experienced, but you need to kind of understand these and understand how Ableton works on the back end just a tiny tad bit, because if you don't, you know, it could harm your creative workflow. It could harm your creative you know, vision, right? Because, you know, it's like, imagine you're trying to paint something, but the paint has like cat hair in it, right? Like you're like, oh my God, my paint is ruined. Well, it's like, you know, you got to make sure that there's no cat hair in it, right? So you got to understand how Ableton as a technology works, as a software works. So that way, when you do come to producing the music, you're not going to be hitting all these roadblocks, right? And I can go over compression and EQ and song structure and all that stuff. But I think the best thing to do is to look at other people's, and I'll be making more breakdowns of some of my tracks to kind of explain what I'm doing, and it will just show a little bit more perspective on why I'm doing these things, because it's kind of hard to explain just like off the top, being like, oh, and do this and do this and do this, but showing it and being like, this is why it does this, because of their relationships together. So yeah, that's pretty much that aspect, right? So the last thing, just to end this off, this is going to be my favorite part of the whole fucking video, and that is rendering out your audio. So great, I just made an audio track. I just made my first song. I'm so happy. How do I get this whole fucking shebang over to the master and out, and then save it to an MP3? So what you're going to want to do is press Control-Shift-R, and it's going to create this window called Export Audio Video, right? So like I said, you can use video. You can create video with Ableton. There's many things you can do with Ableton. You can be DJing and on Ableton, and then have a video playing in the background coming from Ableton. Ableton is very versatile, much like FL Studios, much like any of these softwares, right? So all this is going to do is going to take everything that came out of the master and turn it into an MP3 file, right? So you can render the track from the master, right? Or you can use it from a selected track. If I just like a certain bass, if I like just a certain drum, if I like just a certain hi-hat, I can render just that out into an audio MP3 form, right? And I don't have to choose an MP3 form. I can choose WAV, I can choose AIFF, I can choose FLAC. But the thing is, with these different WAV files, you're going to realize that they're not very commonly used for sharing sounds and for working on these files, right? A lot of these are for different types of things that happen within the music industry business, and different files may be needed for these. Because that's more technological stuff. Like, these different files come in different forms for different situations, right? So you have the bit depth. Well, like I said, you don't want any hair in your paint when you're painting, right? So bit depth, you need to educate yourself, and don't fuck with it. Don't touch it. Don't mess with it. Just leave it where it's at, right? Same thing with dithering. You want to leave that the same thing. It's much like the hair concept with the paint. Once you kind of know that you need to keep these things aligned, it's going to make it a lot easier. But I would educate yourself if you can. You can encode an MP3. I don't know what that's for. You can automatically upload it to SoundCloud. I wouldn't recommend doing this, because it's best to hear the track in an MP3 form before you upload it somewhere, right? You want to make sure that this audio is coming out the best it can, right? You don't want any hair in your paint, right? So you want to make sure that all of this audio, when it comes out, is fully how you want it to sound before you release it on any of your social media or any of your platforms that you will, right? You can create a video. This is where you would help with the exporting product of that product. And it comes out in a MP4, which is amazing. Very versatile, like I mentioned. You can do all that stuff. Well, let's say I'm ready. I want this song to come out. You can render as loop. You can take a second and look at all these in your own, just to kind of familiarize, because thank goodness a lot of this stuff is using English to kind of explain it, right? Like normalize just means like normalize the levels, convert to mono, right? And converts it all into that middle sandwich of the stereo field signal, right? Boom. Like I said, in mono, it's all in the middle, right? You can render the whole thing as a loop, right? If I want this whole thing as a loop, I can have it as a whole loop, right? Different things like that, right? Render start, right? That's when it starts and when it would end, like how long do I want this audio clip, right? How much do I want to render out of it, right? So that's all the stuff. You can kind of go over that on your own. But then we're gonna go ahead and press export. It's gonna open up another window. I don't know if you can see that window, but it's asking me what would you like to name it, basically, right? So I'm gonna name this my first song, right? So boom. Now, for you, you might have to change the pathing of where the actual MP3 file will go. You know, like I said, if you're brand new, I imagine like computers are just as annoying, because that was a problem for me. Was the software was a heap, and then the technology aspect was also another heap. But it's going to ask you where you want to save that MP3. You're going to save it somewhere where you can find it, preferably in a folder with all your saved songs together. And then it's going to show you a little screen, and it's going to say rendering. And then when it finishes its rendering, rendering just means it's converting, you know, to an MP3. Now, once it fully renders that product, then you'll be able to go into that folder where you saved it. You're going to be able to listen to it in its full version. Now, understand, when you're going from Ableton to an MP3, it's never going to be a one-to-one, right? Until you get to that advanced level where you can kind of like see what it's going to sound like, right? But what's happening is, as you can tell, there's different audio tracks happening, right? They're all happening at once, right? Everything's happening at once, and it's coming out of the master. So everything's kind of, all the signal flow is going to one place. It's going to the master, and it's going to leave. So when it leaves the master, it's going to sound different, right? Essentially, you want to get to a point where you can kind of like guesstimate where it's going to be, and kind of like get used to it in the mix, which is what we would refer to like when you're actually working on the product. You can actually find out what sounds good and what you want it to sound like. And then when you export it, you need to double check and make sure that it sounds similar to the vision that you're trying to accomplish, whether it be mixing, you know, the artistic style, the rhythms, you know, that one little screechy part. You need to make sure that all this stuff is uniform to your original vision when you're in the DAW. So yeah, so that's pretty much it. Once you export it to MP3, you're going to want to rename it, but you'd also want to keep it something similar, so that way you can go back to the original file, because that's another aspect of this is the, you know, it's going to export it, whatever the name of the song, of the song project, right, of the project title, right, it's going to export it. So if I name this, you know, Billy Joel, like, it's going to export the product, and the title of the MP3 will be Billy Joel, right? And if you want to change it, let's say now I changed it to Jimmy Jackson, right? Well, I'm not going to be able to find the song, the MP3 version of Billy Joel, because it doesn't exist anymore. You have to make sure that you name, you know, whatever you're going to name your song, and the MP3 version is something similar to what you're going to name the actual project, right? So that way you can find everything. Everything should be easier for you to find, right? It's like a grocery store, right? Like if you go to the soup section looking for soup, you better find soup, right? Like it better not be fishes, like fish fucking, you know, fish heads, right? You expect soup, right? So that's why organization is so much easier, because it'll make your life 10 times easier, right? So anything I missed, there's other things like sends and returns, but that's all kind of more advanced stuff, and you can find out way more about that with other people, or even if you want to leave a comment or something, you can even leave me a message, and I can further explain it the best I can. But I would always recommend finding people who are way more experienced with this stuff, because they can answer any of your questions, you know, and most of the time stuff you never even thought about, right? So that's pretty much it for me, and I just kind of wanted to leave you with like 3 kind of important keys. 1, organization is key. 2, learn from other people. And 3, you know, don't let cat hair get in your paint. You know, make sure that, like I said, there's 3 aspects to it. It's the actual sound production, the technology, and then how it's perceived in the human ear, right? So you need to make sure that all of those things are in check, so that way there's no hair in your paint. And while you're painting, you know, when you're making something, you don't want any hair in your paint. You don't want anything just happening that's just gonna screw up your entire sound, right? So always double check, always triple check, always quadruple check, always sextuple check. Always make sure you're checking your work, because tiny little things in the technology side, tiny little things in the sound production side can completely throw your whole project in the garbage, and you do not want that happening. So yeah, this has been Repent, and thank you for checking this out. Hope you learned something. Peace.